This project may look complex, but it isn't. It consists of the double board stockinette stitch, which wrap I will show you, knitting and purling using that wrap, and one simple cable. In addition to this shawl, I'll show you how to use the same basic plan to make other shawls, ponchos, scarves, blankets, and even a collar. But those and the actual knitting pattern will come in future videos. In this video, we'll go over the stockinette wrap, knitting, purling, and crossing the cable so you're comfortable. One good way to start your knitting is by making a slip knot. Wrap your 2 fingers twice, lift over again, grab the loop that's now showing and pull it through, and that makes an adjustable slip knot that can be placed on the first peg of the loom. Let's proceed to the stockinette cast on. The wrap rows and the cast on rows are just the same. Back peg on the left, front peg on the right, second peg on the back, and then begin zigzagging to and fro, skipping alternate pegs on each board. This loom is easy for you to see what's happening, which is why I chose this little one, and it's small enough to stay all in the picture. Later I will cast on and knit for you again, but on the larger looms you won't have as clear a view of everything that's going on. The return row, which is really part of one row, you wrap every peg that was omitted the last time. Every row in double board stockinette is wrapped in exactly the same way, but we make a small exception for purl stitches, which I'll show you in a moment. For knit stitches, every bottom loop is pulled over the new wrap towards the center between the 2 boards, and that act of pulling over, called hooking over by some, creates the new knit stitch. To work on the back board, you can simply tilt the board toward yourself, as I'm doing, so that you can see, or you can lift it up and turn it. It doesn't matter, and you won't get confused about where you are, because you always have the yarn tail. And you know that starts out, for most of us, on the left. Most of us prefer to wrap from left to right and back again for some reason. Hooking over is the same on the front board as on the back board. Lower loop over existing stitch, and a new stitch has been formed. Purl stitches are sort of like upside down knit stitches. When one or a few are needed in a row, I wrap with the normal stockinette wrap up to it and work the purl stitches while they're being wrapped. We go down through the existing stitch, pick up the yarn that is wrapped below it, lift it off the peg, and set the newly formed and pulled through stitch on the peg. Then continue the stockinette wrap. This is going to be a purl stitch also. So again, the tool goes down from the top, picks up the yarn that's being wrapped from below. We wrap below for this, though we wrap above for a knit stitch. Pull through, pick up the new stitch, put it on the peg. For this pattern, all the stitches on the back board are knit stitches, and the remainder of those on the front board are knit stitches. So I'll just wrap back with the stockinette wrap and knit them all over as usual. The fact that I'm knitting the backboard off first is pure happenstance. I just happen to do it. When you go to knit off the front board and you've made some purls, just remind yourself that they're already done. There's nothing missing. You just have some stitches already made, like that one. Now I'm going to point out my 2 purl stitches. There are 5 knit stitches between them, and we will cable on those. It goes like this. Move the leftmost of the cable stitches over and the next one to reside on the purl peg temporarily. Now, the next 3 all move over to take up those empty spaces. So this is going to be a 3-stitch over 2-stitch cable. Now we rescue the temporary residents and bring them over one at a time in order as far as we can to the right and place them on the empty pegs. It will be a little bit tight. And there they are. The cable is completed. As mentioned, it will be tight, but it should not be impossible, and it should not break the yarn or damage the loom. If it's that bad, you've got one of a couple of problems. First, you may be wrapping overly tightly, and especially after a cable row, you want to be very conscious of not doing that, because that will make the work get tighter and tighter, and it will cause the gauge to be different. New knitters often do knit overly tightly because their hands are tense and they're afraid of the pegs dropping stitches. But it's important to learn to let your non-wrapping hand help by pinching the yarn to the peg with your fingertips so it doesn't have to be that tight. The second issue could be yarn. Wool and acrylic are definitely recommended for beginners or anyone who has trouble making the cables cross, because they're a little naturally more stretchy and resilient than are some other yarns. Cotton is not at all, and silk and alpaca have very little stretch. The third thing is the setup. If your boards are close together but your pegs are far apart, the cable's stitches will have to stretch much farther to get reseated on their new pegs. So if you have a choice, choose a loom with its pegs fairly near one another and space the boards out to get large enough stitches. The geometry of how the stitches have to move across the loom to get to their destination pegs is much more generous with the second setup. For this reason, you'll see me working with this setup. That is a tremendous distance between the boards, and it's more washers in use than the manufacturer intended. I got extras at the hardware store. But because of that setup, when I go to cable between my two purl stitches, it's going to be much easier than it actually was on the little sample I just made. I'm going to lift the first stitch on the left, moving my little marker out of the way, and temporarily place it on the purl peg to the left of the 5 knit stitches that form the cable. Same deal with the second one. And so far there's really no strain on the loom, and there are 3 stitches on the purl peg. Now the next 3 stitches are getting moved into the empty positions, and I'm trying desperately to keep my hand out of your way, but I demonstrated first on the other little sample filming from above so that in case in real life this happened, you would know what was going on. Now it is time to lift the 2 temporarily held stitches one at a time in order. First one goes to the far right peg, second one goes to the only remaining peg, and the cable will be crossed. And I think you may have seen that in spite of the awkward angle at which I'm holding my hand in order to give you a view, it's easier. That's because I'm using big stitches that have 2 strands of worsted weight number 4 yarn run together, and they're only getting about 2.5 stitches per inch. But that size is created by the distance between the boards, not the distance between the pegs, so my stitches don't have to swing far when they stretch to go over to their new pegs. In the next video, I'll show you how to plan the project that you'd like to accomplish with this stitch pattern. There is going to be a written pattern to accompany this series available on Ravelry, so that you don't have to do a lot of math yourself to plan a successful project.